All right, my friends, welcome to Lab at Home. As always, our learning process is all about respect, and we ask you all to show respect by using kind language and appropriate words in the chat box, as this is a program for everybody. We have our moderator is Jenna today, who will be moderating the chat. Welcome, Jenna. All of that said, it's okay to disagree and it's okay to share your feelings. We welcome all ideas that are founded in respect, and we invite all of you to do the same. When we have the lab on site, we encourage our learners to lead with their questions and ideas. So I'll be asking all of you plenty of questions, and I hope that you will share your ideas and your own questions as much as possible in the chat. So I am broadcasting from my own lab at home and not from the museum today. Unfortunately, some unforeseen circumstances arose that made it so we could not do our behind the scenes tour of Carolina Wildlife this week, but we'll be doing it later on in the summer. It just means that we get to do one of my other favorite kind of lab activities, and I'm really excited to share this one with you as well, because it's kind of a growing hobby of mine. So I know that we sent out an email to those who were kind of registered. We sent that email to you last night with kind of a list of materials. Is there anyone who was able to gather any of those materials to do the experiment along with us today? And it's okay if not, right? Because you can always check out what we're doing and then try it yourself afterward. But I just want to know, oh, it does sound like, yeah, Jaden, sounds like you have gathered some stuff. That's great. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be working with natural materials to make a mini landscape, a miniature landscape. Yeah, that's okay. No, it's okay if you guys are just kind of watching and you can see how it goes. You can maybe learn from my mistakes if/when I make any. That's always a good tactic as well. But we're going to be talking about using natural materials and making a miniature landscape. What does it mean when I say mini or miniature? What does that mean? Yeah, it means little. Exactly, right? We're going to be making some little versions of landscapes. We're going to be using a couple of different kind of skills and concepts today. One of those skills being scale. We're going to be scaling things down, right? Things that were used to being large, we're going to make them a small version of them, and we're going to keep them relative in size to one another, right? Meaning that if I'm going to make a mini landscape with a tree and a flower, I know that in real life, the tree is larger than a flower. So in my miniature landscape, even though they're both smaller than they are really, I wouldn't want my flower to be larger than my mini tree, right? So we're going to be keeping scale in mind. We're going to be dealing with different size ratios or comparisons. And we're going to be looking at some different natural processes of different natural materials. Those of you who did gather natural materials, if you did, I would love to hear in the chat what kind of stuff you have. I'll share with you what I have. I've got a few of these here. I've got a few things that are not currently living, right? This is some dried wood. I found a really great dried stump, and I took some wood off of that. I've got some other non-living things here, like these different kinds of rocks. I've got some different kind of rocks. I've got some birch bark, so it's really kind of papery. It's sort of like nature's paper. I've also got a bunch of stuff that is alive. I've got some moss, a lot of different kinds of moss. I've even got some little, almost like little seedlings that I pulled out of the ground, and their roots are still intact. So we're going to be making them into a landscape that's able to survive kind of on its own. So it sounds like Jaden has some dry leaves and grass and soil. That's perfect. Oh, of course, I almost forgot. I, of course, did get some soil. I got some soil from outside, which is in here. The ground was kind of hard where I was, and I was just digging with a spoon. So I got a little bit of soil from outside, and I also have a little bit of potting soil. So from like plants I got from the store, I have some potting soil. And you can use either one for our experiment, but we're going to be talking about why some dirt from outside might be really helpful. This is a great way to classify it, Jenna. I have a lot of biotic and abiotic factors to put in my miniscape. So biotic would mean that it's alive. So my moss. Abiotic means that it's not alive, or even that it was never alive, like a rock. So I've got these big rocks, I've got these little rocks. I've also got some charcoal. I originally didn't think I was going to be able to find any charcoal, but when I was outside, I noticed that my neighbors had deposited some charcoal from their wood-burning fireplace, so that's really fortunate for me. Sounds like Alexa has some dirt, some little minerals and rocks. Oh, mint. Mint is one of those really, really great plants that loves to grow. That's a good one. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got a bunch of different things, and we're talking about putting them together to make a miniature landscape. There's different ways that we can do this, right? We could make a landscape where we're just putting things together to scale down the outside in a way that we're not really concerned about the plants staying alive, right? That's like we could do that in here. I have kind of my little tray of dirt, and I could recreate an outdoor landscape using some of these living things and non-living things. And then it doesn't really matter if they're able to, if these plants live or not. It's just sort of for me to look at for the day, right? Or I can change it around as I want to. I'd love to also talk about making a mini landscape that is self-sustaining, meaning that by itself, it's able to continue living, right? I've got some plants. You can see some of my plants behind me. They're alive, but I still have to water them, right? I'm talking about making a miniature landscape that you don't even have to water for the most part. It all does it by itself, and we'll talk about how. So in order to make this kind of closed, self-sustaining mini landscape, which we'll also call a terrarium, we're going to start with a jar. I have this kind of like glass ball jar. It has a lid, right? But there's other things that you could use. I've got kind of this old ice cream container. It has a lid. It's made out of plastic. You could use Tupperware, plastic Tupperware that has a lid. The only thing that this container needs to be is waterproof. It needs to be able to keep water in it. So once we have our kind of waterproof container, right, this is going to be where our landscape is. It's going to be inside of here. When we're thinking about keeping plants alive, what do we think those plants need? What does a plant need to survive? And I think that we've got a really good question here, right? How do plants grow? And we're going to be talking about how they're able to grow. What does a plant need? What do you think? Needs the sun. Yep, definitely. Yeah, plants definitely need the sun. They need water, exactly. What else? Oh, they need air. They need a certain gas in the air, carbon dioxide. Perfect. Yeah, they need some space, and a lot of them need dirt, exactly. They need a bit of soil, right? We should say not all of them do. Some of them are good at surviving and getting the nutrients and everything they need from the air. They're often called air plants, but all of the plants that I have here do need some dirt. So plants have this amazing ability to make their own food. We have to, our bodies, to get the energy that we need in order to live, we have to get food from outside of our bodies, right? But plants make their own food. Does anyone know what that's called? When a plant makes their own food? It's kind of a long word. It starts with a P. I bet you've heard of it before. I bet if I say it, you will recognize it. Starts with, ooh, that's a good one, Jenna. It starts with photo. Yeah, there you go. It is photosynthesis. Very nice. So plants make their own food. They take the energy from the sun, they combine it with water and carbon dioxide gas, right? That's a gas that's all around us. We actually make carbon dioxide. Can everybody do this along with me? Take a deep breath. Ready? And then breathe out. So when you breathe out, your body breathed in oxygen and used it, and then the leftover, it produced carbon dioxide gas. So plants kind of breathe in carbon dioxide gas. So carbon dioxide, some energy from the sun, and water, and nutrients from the soil or from its environment. And it has the ability to create its own sugar, right? So that's basically what photosynthesis is. We just want to make an environment where plants can photosynthesize. If we're putting it in this container, right, we know that it's clear, that the sun can get in here, it can still get energy from the sun. We also know that it needs to trap water, right? The plants that I have around me, I need to kind of refill the water because the water evaporates into the air, the plants transpire it, which we'll talk about in just a second, but we're gonna be trapping the water. So we have to figure out a way to do that. Instead of putting down soil as our first layer, we're gonna do what's called putting in a false bottom. So I'm gonna take some rocks, some little pebbles, and I have kind of smaller ones, probably some larger ones would work, but I'm gonna put these rocks in the bottom of my terrarium to be. It's gonna make kind of a loud noise here, ready? All right, there we go, that wasn't too bad. There we go. So I've got some rocks in my terrarium now, and that's because I want the water that's gonna be trapped inside of this terrarium, I want it to collect in the bottom. And I don't want it to collect around the dirt, because if there's kind of standing water in the dirt, then that'll encourage things to start decaying maybe faster than I want them to, right? So if I separate the dirt layer from where the water is going to be, right, I'll have a more successful and more self-sustaining terrarium. So I've got these rocks. They're not alive. They've never been alive. So the water can drain down in here, and there'll be a barrier between it and our soil. So I'm going to switch to our jar cam now to get a little bit closer to it, so we can see a little bit better what I'm doing. There we go, there's my arm, and there's my jar. So I've got my false bottom here, and there's other things that I can do to separate my soil layer from my kind of repository, my area where the water is going to go. One thing that I happened to have with me was this piece of window screen. I screened in my porch fairly recently, so I have this bit of window screen. It's great because it has a lot of tiny holes that the water can kind of run through. And it's also something that's not gonna biodegrade. This stuff is made out of artificial materials. It's not gonna break down, right? So something that I can do to make an even better barrier between my water and my dirt layer is I can use a little screen as a barrier. If you don't have any screen, that's totally fine. We can either go without it, or you could kind of make your own by poking holes in a bit of plastic bag, right? What we're doing is we're just creating a barrier between our soil layers that still allows the water to trickle down into the bottom of the jar. So I don't have kind of a good surface for poking, but all we would need to do is poke a bunch of holes, right? That's all this is kind of an artificial material with a bunch of holes. So we can do that with plastic as well. This is a great question. What does biodegradable mean? So biodegradable things are things that were once alive, and when they are no longer living, they break down into their kind of component pieces. So something that returns to nature, right? If I have an apple core and I throw it into the forest, there's lots of things like little bacterium that will break it down into little pieces, and it kind of returns to the soil rather than it being like a piece of plastic. If I threw this in the woods, it would remain plastic. There aren't any bacteria that would be able to break it down. Does that make sense? That's a great question. So my rocks will not biodegrade, right? They could break down in the sense that if I crush them up, I could crush them into sand, but they're not going to decay. That's another word for biodegrade, decay. And especially not when I put another layer between this false bottom and my dirt. So I'm gonna put in my screen layer. If you don't have one, that's totally okay. You can either make your own out of plastic, or you can just proceed with your dirt layer. I also, since I was able to find this charcoal, I'm gonna add a charcoal layer now. So I have some charcoal, and it's gonna be another layer between my dirt, my soil, and my false bottom. It does something that's really special, right? What is charcoal? I'm going to be crushing up some little pieces of charcoal. And can you all tell me what you think charcoal might be? And I can give you a closer look at this as well. What do we think? It is, that's exactly right. It's carbon. It's whatever's left over from burned wood, right? Or burned leaves. It's the stuff that's left behind. It's just carbon. And it has this really great ability to filter. So when the water gets reused inside of this terrarium, it kind of has another layer that it will pass through that will help filter out the water. So that's something that carbon's really good for. So again, this isn't necessary, but it's something that can help the success of your terrarium if we have a nice little carbon layer in there. We're also going to move right on to our next part. Oh, this is a great question. Is it an igneous rock? Now, it's true that it is kind of produced by some similar forces that might create an igneous rock, like heat and pressure, but it used to be wood, right? So it was never a rock, right? So rocks have never been alive. We would say they're abiotic, whereas this used to be some regular wood, maybe kind of like this. But when it was set on fire, it was burned, and all that was left over was this carbon. There we go. I see my camera finally focused on it. There we go. So this is left over from any fire. I don't know if any of you have ever, or if your adults ever used like a grill or anything like that. Sometimes there's stuff like this left over. Although I'll say charcoal briquettes that you buy in a store, they do have some other chemical preservatives that might make it a little hard to use for this setting. But again, you can use charcoal, you can not use charcoal. I'm just using it here so I can mention that it is sometimes used in this process. Look how dirty it made my hands. Okay, so now we have made our false bottom. We've made a little layer to help separate the rocks from the rest of it. We've got a layer of charcoal. Finally now, we are getting to our dirt. So I mentioned to you guys, I only have a little bit of dirt from outside because it was a little, the dirt was a little tough. So I'm going to use a little bit of my potting soil. But I also want to use some of that dirt from outside. I'm going to use a mix of it. And there's a reason that I want to do that. The amazing thing about this dirt from outside, right, is that I know that it can support living things. I know because there's all sorts of grass growing around it. There's all kinds of teeny tiny microfauna, so tiny little living things living in here that will help help my plants grow inside of my terrarium. So something that we don't usually think about plants needing, but that they often do need, is bacteria. They need their soil to have a certain balance of bacteria to help break things down, to help kind of keep the soil in a healthy place for them so that they can use the nutrients in the soil. It's true, we usually think about bacteria being something that's kind of gross, but in this case, it's something that, that plants need. And in fact, humans need bacteria too. We have bacteria in our bodies that help break down our food. So I've got some in here, and this is something where I saw a few this morning. I'm not sure that the camera will focus on them. But a lot of times in soil from outside, you can see these teeny, 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 tiny little insects, and they're called springtails. And they look like these little white specks. You can barely see them, but they crawl around in there. They are really, really helpful for what we're trying to do with our soil. So, and even if I don't see them in here, there may be, it may be that springtails will grow out of this dirt. There's also the chance that I'll get some bonus plants out of this dirt, right? There may be some spores or seeds in here that I don't know are in here, but that may bloom or that may sprout given the chance. So I've got kind of my dirt layer, I've got my carbon layer, I've got that little sheet separating them, I've got my rocks. Now I'm going to finally add my plants and rocks, right? This is the part where, right, art and science kind of mix. I'm gonna just put things in here that I know the terrarium will need, but also that I think look nice. So I'm thinking about recreating a landscape. And I'm imagining, in my mind, I'm imagining kind of a, like a forest glen. So I'm thinking about, what if there was a stump in this glen, right? Like this is gonna be my stump. I'll maybe put it back here. And I'm going to imagine that there's all sorts of mosses all around it. And I've got some mosses here that I'm going to place inside of my terrarium. So I have one type here. I have a different type here as well. Maybe I'll turn it like this. And this is just, I'm just experimenting with different things. The great thing about doing art is that all artists are also scientists. So I'm just experimenting with what things I like, what things I think resemble or look like a real landscape, what stuff kind of looks weird and random and maybe I don't want it in there. And I can change my mind, I can move these around, right? I think I'm gonna pick some of this moss as well. This moss I feel like reminds me of a larger version, a larger scaled up version of grass because it has these little tendrils that kind of stick up. So I definitely want to have some of these in here. And it's a little hard for me to poke them down in there sometimes. So something that I can use are, I can use a pair of chopsticks. I have just one chopstick here. I can also use a paintbrush or a stick or a dowel just to help place them really delicately in all the places that I want them to go. So if I'm imagining that this is a beautiful forest glen here, maybe I'll also include some small seedlings. So these are just some little teeny tiny baby trees that I found, or possibly baby shrubs that I found when I was gathering my materials. So I'm going to include these as well. This one's kind of delicate, so I have some tweezers that are going to help me. So I'm going to kind of put them in there. Oops, push them down. There we go. So I have a little bit of a tree. I'm going to try and use a piece of moss to help me bury that a little bit. There we go. Oops. Maybe I need 2 pairs of tweezers to help me out. There we go. I've also got, I'll just put one more plant in here. Now, I don't want to crowd it up too much, but I know that when I look outside, I see so many different kinds of plants, especially on the smaller scale, right? So I want to include as many different kinds of plants as I can. I also have, I don't really know, I'm not an expert here, so I don't really know which plants will end up surviving, which plants won't end up making it, right? It's all kind of an experiment. So here is my tiny world that I have created in here. And this is a great, great question. We have Andrea asking, how does it get its water? So these things here, I collected them earlier this morning, and I've been dripping a little bit of water on them, but right now they're a little bit dry. So the next thing that I need to do before I close up this terrarium is add some water. I'm going to add some of this water here that I set out a few hours ago. It's just water from my sink, but it is dechlorinated. Chlorine, right, is something that we find in our tap water that helps it make it healthier for us to drink, but it's not as good for helping plants to grow. So if we leave water out, the chlorine can off-gas, meaning it can kind of almost like evaporate, right, out of the water, and we're left with dechlorinated water that helps us grow our plants. Right now, what we want to do is we want to get some of this water in here so that it has some water to begin its mini water cycle. You can use a spoon, you can just pour it in. If you have a spray bottle, that's something that I've seen before. That's kind of one of the best ways to get water in here in a way that's not going to be too much water. I just happen to have a pipette with me. I don't have any spray bottles or anything. So I'm going to use this to just put a little bit of water in here. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting a bit of water in here. And if it is the right amount of water, then my terrarium, once it's closed, will be able to sustain itself. And we're going to talk about how. All right, it's got plenty of water. Everything's nice and moist in there. Right now, I'm putting water in here, and the plants will use some of the water, right? What would happen to the water if I did not put a top on this? What do you think? Right, the plants are going to use some of it, but what happens to it? What happens to the rest of it? It evaporates, exactly. it will evaporate. That means it will turn into this water, this liquid water will turn into a gas form. So it will evaporate and it will escape the top of the jar. That means that I will have to put more water in it in order to keep it alive, just like my potted plants. But if I trap that water, instead of evaporating and escaping, it will have nowhere to go. It'll kind of start to change phase again, meaning it will be liquid water, it will evaporate into the air, and we'll trap it inside so that it will begin to condense. It will turn back into a liquid with the addition of the heat from the sun, right? So we're saying that we've got this clear jar, right? And once we think it has enough water, we are sealing it off. Light from the sun gets in here. These plants photosynthesize. They make their own food. The water plants photosynthesize. Also heavy enough, they will drip down and water the plants again, right? That's the water cycle. So it's sort of like we're making our own miniature clouds that will turn into miniature rain and run down the sides and water the plants again. So that's how we trap the water in there, and it keeps going, right? It not only evaporates, but actually plants release water as well. And you can kind of test this out yourself if there's a growing plant near you. Something you can do is take a plastic bag and you can open it up and put a few leaves, right? A few growing leaves in here. Like if this were a plant that was still alive, I could put it in here. And if this was still a closed bag, I could seal this in here. And if I came back in a few hours, I would see water droplets all around here because plants transpire. They give off a little bit of water in addition to drinking some of it in. So I've got the water here. I know that the water is going to kind of recycle itself. There's one last thing, right? What else do we say that plants need? We said that they need the dirt, that we said that they need water, we said that they need nutrients from, oh, we already said, yeah, nutrients from the soil, they need the sun. They also need something else. They that gas, carbon dioxide. So you may be wondering, and I know I was wondering, if I put a lid on it, am I not trapping all of the gas in here? Won't it use up all of the carbon dioxide and convert it into oxygen gas, and won't it not have enough? So part of a plant's photosynthesis, right, does produce a little bit of carbon dioxide, plus some of the stuff going on in this dirt is going to provide carbon dioxide. All of the bacterium that we talked about in here are doing the hard work of breaking things down little by little. And when they do that, a byproduct, a kind of side effect of them doing that is carbon dioxide gas. So it's this entire environment in here. Everything is kind of feeding the other parts of living things in here. And that's what is creating this self-sustaining little pod. This is a great question. How does the dirt make the plant grow? So the dirt helps with not only providing, in this case, providing some of that carbon dioxide by the processes of breaking down or biodegrading. The dirt also has essential nutrients that the plants need. And the nutrients have to be there in a way that the plants can use. So they have to be broken down in a certain way. It's sort of like, I'm going to turn my face back on here. Here we go. It's sort of like our bodies need certain vitamins and minerals that we can't make ourselves. So like I take an iron supplement because my body's not super good at making its own iron. And if I took a piece of iron and just held it in my hand, my body wouldn't be able to use it, right? I have to take it as a supplement. I have to eat it in my case. The bacteria in the soil helps break down those materials so that the plants can eat it, if that makes sense. So the dirt is where it gets its different nutrients, nutrition that it needs, vitamins and minerals and all that good stuff that it needs to live. It also helps contain the water, right, and keep the roots moist. I'm not sure if I've put enough water in here, and it's something that I'll have to just kind of watch it and test, right? I'll know that if my plants start drooping just a tiny bit, if I'm not seeing any water beads of condensation on the side, right, I know that maybe I'll need to add a little bit more water. So I'll open it up, I'll add a little bit more water, and when it drips down, I should eventually see a little bit of water here in the false bottom, right, which will eventually evaporate and condense again and water the plants and kind of do this whole cycle over and over again, right? Terrariums, certain terrariums, right, can sustain themselves for years. I know our friend Max, who sometimes moderates Lab at Home, he has a terrarium that he has kept for 10 years. He opens it about 4 times a year to sometimes add a little bit of water in and to sometimes take a little bit of water out, right? So he has kept it alive for 10 years in a closed container because it creates its own little environment that can sustain itself. But he does have to open it every once in a while just to kind of make sure that things are balanced. So I'm going to let this sit in the sun and see if it begins to form drops of condensation or if I need to add a little bit more water. And once I see the cycle kind of going on and on, I will know that I have the right amount of water and I can just leave it to grow. So that's kind of what we've talked about today, is making something that grows on its own, that uses every part of its environment to keep itself self-sustaining. I saw a really good, oh, this is really cool. You have a cocoon in your bottle. That's so awesome. So stuff that decays, stuff that breaks down, as that cocoon might, will also change the balance of carbon dioxide. So I'll be really interested to see how that affects the growth of your bottle. That's so interesting, or of your terrarium. I saw so many really interesting thoughts and questions and ideas. I really appreciate those who have done our experiment along with us. If you would like to give this a try, of course, after Lab at Home, we will send out the curriculum, the materials list, to help you make your own terrarium if you'd like to experiment with it. This recording will also be put up on YouTube a little bit later so that you can go over any of the things that we've talked about before. But I really appreciate you guys checking this one out with me. I really like this. I think it's really it's really soothing and satisfying to have this miniature green lush landscape that I can look into. Even though I'm not outside, I can see the beautiful outside inside, if that makes sense. I'm really looking forward to doing the Carolina Wildlife Behind the Scenes tour a little bit later in the summer. We'll certainly let you guys know when that is back part of the plan. But in the meantime, I hope that we will also see you next week at the same time, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. I'll be really excited to do an experiment with you all. Yeah, thank you so much. I always really, really enjoy doing these experiments with you all. This is a really cool one too. Thank you. All right, my friends, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Remember, if you want to share any of your thoughts, ideas, questions, pictures, if you want to put them on social media, you can tag the museum and hashtag Lab at Home. We would love to see all the kind of cool stuff that you guys come up with. Awesome. Thank you so much, my friends. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. See you later, friends. Bye.